Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to try this. Yate? Yeah? Good afternoon, welcome. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Sarah Schechter, and I am an Assistant Attorney General with the state of Utah, representing the state on water rights matters, including the Navajo Nation Settlement. And right here we have Casey Francisco. He's from VIA, is that correct? Yep. And he's going to be our translator. So throw something at me when you're ready for me to give you a minute to talk. Okay. We also have a lot of other folks with us today that I want to introduce. We've got Michelle Begay from VIA. She's a civil engineer helping with the project. We have Justin Record from the Bureau of Reclamation. He's our federal team leader. Gary Jordan from Keller Blissner. He's a field tech. We're going to talk about what he's doing in a little bit. Ryan Broadbent and Eric Hacking in the back there. They're both engineers with the Division of Water Rights for the state of Utah. We have Mark Stilson, who's the regional engineer for the state of Utah out of the Price region, which covers southeastern Utah. We also have MacArthur Stant here. There he is, Mac, who is with the Navajo Department of Justice. And we have Liz Sparks and Virginia Moore, and they're with the Bureau of Trust Funds Administration. Did I do it? Yes. All right, well, thank you everybody for being here. It looks like we have a lot of people who were at our last meeting, so you might notice a few tweaks that we made this time, but that's okay. Basically, what I'm gonna do is give us a little rundown of the Navajo settlement and with the state of Utah and the federal government, and then we're gonna talk about what's called the list of unclaimed rights, which is where we are in the general adjudication process. Then I'm going to turn it over for a minute to Liz and Virginia. They can just tell you all a little bit about what they're doing, and then Justin and Gary are going to talk about the Federal Hydrographic Survey that's being undertaken. And then we'll do questions at the end.
Okay, thank you. Dishi ya kododa evalit ahi chikwa ya bikao hogasia. I don't have a case date with the Ghana kododa lenigi ishi for engineers that long consa tundis ka. I don't nije ke on sa tai in non George de Washington. I don't have a class in Hania. I don't shake kodo laid Tunanis desdan. Not Ani wants to study the Abkhaz and Sunday. Willie, I don't a Western Navajo Agency, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Branch of Natural Resource. I don't got not a call a Katats and she 45 years is but not sure. I noticed my schoolmate is in here with us too, so. But don't talk about my glory days, okay? Let's keep that one quiet. Ede yado adin hanoyai shikedo shikezen nosleniki do ben hisolstahi ashin han so the quite behind that ordeal.
All right, thank you. So I'm just going to briefly go through sort of the historical timeline of how we got where we are today. It started way back, more than 20 years ago, with informal discussions between the state of Utah and the Navajo Nation. The formal negotiations didn't begin until 2003, and these were discussions over the water rights settlement that we ended up reaching in 2015. But we always knew that the Navajo Nation had a reserved right. We just didn't know what that right would look like. So it took those 12 years, including the publication of a reserved right report, to get the agreement signed in 2015. Then it took another 5 years to get federal congressional approval in 2020, and the Utah State Legislature jumped on it right after that and ratified the agreement in 2021. And then we'll look at it in a minute, but the agreement was finally signed by Secretary Holland, Governor Cox, and President Nez in 2022.
later did about this so what 8 year like agenda on but 11 year kodo bahan net or this didn't know what are later later Anthony kind of net had the called DD a water rights a adjudication is all the other the will then we are hold all year will the court a call even not a bashnet or the leak and later a negotiation just had this on Navajo Washington it needs been do around the Ebakea Tio a dashi a Joe Shirley the Sataha dashi that Besna has net. I don't know a reserve right report is known. Ashid also Hinne Kato Obahan Neto Halita or Nisa Johat Noshi Doshit Ahobain del Kato Ita 2004 Yata. I don't know the Kata is not Ani than Linigi Kodo Pikik Hodo Niso Digi Ado Niso. The 2015 ada aron the yan le can not get in je would the congressman do aron the Adjudication the band approval is 2020 ko tha na khayata shin aron the state legislation approved 2021 Diba national Kojubo Keda not Enigi J. Ashipi Tojo Joe the state of Utah, Jobata a landscape, Jota Nasha.
So I'm going to talk a bit about what the settlement involves. So first of all, and the most important part is how much water. It's 435 CFS in the San Juan River, including 81,500 acre feet of depletion. And what that means is 81,500 acre feet of water that comes from the land that is the nation within the state of Utah. So it's all entirely within the nation and all entirely within the state of Utah. That is where that 81,500 comes from. There are 4 different priority dates, which means where you stand in line for your water rights. And the most important thing for us to know is that existing uses that existed as of the settlement agreement will retain their original priority dates, meaning they get to be used. If your right is 1884, you get to be used before any other right that came after that, and so on. And that's really important to the nation because it protects existing uses so that those existing uses cannot be impaired by others.
Did Kujin never nash that Yakodo Navajo Nation Kaya home Nats Idlini Hauso Utah Kadina a shipping Toji a Hauso is that a tributaries is Linigi is that a short one Chuyos Inigi AI that they Aqua Hunela AC Pandajan 81,500 acre feet of water, Jot A Batogi, Sin David Ahio, a Adela, Squat A Navajo agent get it now. None of the Chijado I see the Anhidigi, Navahoni, Klinigi AISK.
So another piece of the agreement is that existing state-based rights are protected from impairment by new Navajo uses. That's only uses that are started after the settlement agreement was signed. So if you were already using your water right, you have your water right, it's in priority, you get to use it. If you have a new use that comes online after the agreement, those rights that are older than the agreement, that are state-based rights, will have priority over a new use, but not any existing uses. And then what this compact curtailment means, it refers to the Colorado River Compact. There are provisions that require curtailment by the upper states, that's Utah, New Mexico, Wyoming, Colorado, under certain shortage conditions. Since the 81,500 acre feet comes out of Utah's allocation under the compact, those uses would be subject to curtailment, which means cutting back, the same as any other rights on the system, subject to priority.
Didas kena twitchiness in a journey, kena twitchiness in a gedate agent kisna. A coaches are on it, a no like Nidak at long to the bed at each year or to the business that he covered that AI snake until here in gedate it Navajo Nation. About the has Navigi upon the support existing now who use Ano Ani Hanot Anigi changed Katon Ninigi Asian Yana has not all they say what you would eat all this. Just like that, it's a little dark at show it, the dark at the Hadlon deck or idle is not show yours ego. Adam the Haida a Yabla the dark ever not source given the gate source go. Jonayos eat or nature a Adjudication or this. Okay.
Thank you. A few more details. There's going to be some monitoring and notice requirements that aren't particularly interesting at this point. But I think most important to, the nation members is the water development project funding. There, $250 million were allocated by the federal government and another $8 million from the state of Utah for developing water projects within the nation, within the state of Utah. So that money is to benefit only those nation members that are also living within the state of Utah. So on the reservation in the state of Utah. And there's no out-of-state use for the water. If it comes out of a neighboring state's allotment, that's their business, but the 81.5 comes out of the state of Utah. And any off-reservation use requires a change application with the state engineer.
The monitoring Sinigi and the Tobina Nashigi and the Bendate Nasholis, and the Nat Carto, the 8 and the days eat or the children no a bad of the Nana Webe, when there's Nanigi a Naki, the Naki is not in the meat, so he a quite a as a budget about I ever put ya. Nana to the Quato, the Ashi be told her so the state is not a ajigo a ya. Say be the meat so he aje a bajai bad yako didn't be not snakey tohi a jadate anigi hone not 200 and federal ye out of state a 8 million jod a year. Okay.
So where are we now? We got the settlement agreement signed last May. And now, at about the same time, the state of Utah initiated what's called a general adjudication. That means within a designated area in the state of Utah, the state engineer says to a court, please tabulate all the rights, the water rights that are within this geographical area. And the geographical area that the nation is covered in is its very own. It's called the Navajo Nation Subdivision, and it's as close as we could get to the boundaries of the nation within the state of Utah. We are adjudicating not only the settlement, the 81,500 from the nation, but any, any other water rights that are being used within those boundaries, not by the nation. So there are some state appropriative rights. We have one right nearby at Goldings. I don't know who knows Goldings, but there's a state appropriative right there. So that water right will be included in the adjudication.
Quote Ada with the net Yahot et over days Cardia, Chicodo Asian Basahasito, need busy day la quacky. I don't need. The signing ceremony took place here.
That's correct, yes.
Ada question by the day la. I don't know Igishi a Yaji Kododa adjudication, Senigi. Will then a need a kodo sati list or kodo visit or list that in the Ibasa has the issue called Ada de la called to 2022 yanda mada mana state. Slashin dan hina ade I so tanigi. Anybody participated? Okay. Oh, Willie did. Okay. He says that date was correct.
Great. Okay, and now moving forward, I'm going to tell a little bit more about the adjudication process, but the main thing that happens in an adjudication is called the proposed determination. We submit that to the court. We're planning to do that hopefully next year in 2024. That's the state process. Then concurrently, the federal government is paying for a hydrographic survey, which means a survey of all the water rights that are taking place on the nation by nation members. And that is expected, that's ongoing now. We're hoping 2024, but we'll see where it comes out. But Justin, Record, and Gary will go ahead and explain a little bit more about that.
Okay. The Naski bohot after the Hiki AI Nigi propose the Nana Hydrographic Honana Edo Abahot after the Dota Quae Yado Concat in Trop in the Ashnistahat need of this. The Yahaz Negi Hodon lead naked at Enigi and leave that at the Hanlonovo. Doyen that Shanshi do believe the Hanloni Toyan de Yeho and that Bishna Pastisnido to have Toy would they see a spring that any other has and to 8 and the 8 Argent days catches no need such cats at home and need Kahon to that in the negation gets not net or they do. Kudod neda this high gishi each I gi a has net or this a by the dot after should know a where you have seen. Okay.
All right. Next, I'm going to get into some of the very fine details of what an adjudication is. And then we'll talk about the purpose of this meeting, which is the list of unclaimed rights. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I may ask my friend Ryan to come up and help me with that in a minute if I need to. But we'll see how we go. The most important thing, frankly, on this whole slide is this email address. If you have questions after this meeting, please email the Division of Water Rights. That's the adjudication section. And we can help you understand more of what's happening.
They could have had Yadley, Asahadley had Nedi, Kasigi, they are. So what is a Kedi Yahagi, a coconut, a Kena net, John need a Nenny Lenigi. A Konadi says so, yeah, adjudication is Nenigi. Is a Ile bin Yah, where Sanitle. Koba wind eagle, aid Nehakob, the dog, as is not out of this. A what are able to eat even yet, or even yet upon Basana, Leo, Hona, Hona. I don't know, Lenigi, Lady Cat, Inigi, and they had a shitchos, Inigi, a store, over spars and Aro Codonal, so spad or Nafa, a Codoya on long, but not other AI, Lenigi, Chitochios, Ido, Lenigi, Shisha, Lenigi, a without a Lenigi. Around the Honda in Lenigi, and they is a Ben Days Khan at Lenigi, Hela a yard, as they lab. I don't know, they need or they should Ijiba, Bahazan, or those needs to that a Lenigi, a yes, kid or this. A kid as Tobana has not for a yard, not the kid or this. Heshin night or kid or this, and that's a tahagi, so that a Shilla Ish, Annie, what's I being that. She's now, she had Arusha Halji, Niki Hono, a Quagina, those kiddos, I won't sort of it, I can.
The adjudication process is a multi-step process that's dictated by the state of Utah's statutes. And I'm going to give a very high-level overview of it just so that you kind of understand where we are. What is an adjudication? An adjudication is a court process that's basically kind of like a census of existing water rights in a given geographical area. So what water rights are being used, and what water rights do we have on our records that no one's using anymore? There are plenty of rights within the state that were applied for or appropriated 50, 100 years ago. Nobody's there to use them anymore. That's part of our process, is getting those rights off our records to make room for what water is actually being used. So there's a whole bunch of steps that are pretty boring, but basically the petition was originally filed in 1957 to create the Southeastern Colorado River Adjudication, and nothing happened for a really long time. For the Navajo Nation Subdivision, we filed notice in the paper in March 2022, and we sent out summons to water users that we have on record within the adjudication area, along with some landowners. And some of you may remember, I don't know if any of you were here, we were here in March 30th, 2022, giving similar meetings, public meetings, to explain what we're doing and what our process is. Then in May, we sent a notice to file claims. You had 90 days to submit your claim. That only applied to state appropriative rights. The federal government had you covered on the 81,500.
Ako she on that again. Later she was then asked that by wind in the condition of netto in the tan or later but for just a whole over the Yahoo it was 1957. Ni chodo ni masandan then ni she was better than that ya jota then on his car. Akonded I not be on that, Joe that a lenny. Aron the Hodeshish, Navajo Washington, teaching spas on the Tahagi in that Annie Notley. Quote Ada 2022. Then the A, but that only source A all get notice ya. Short dealer A behind Michaela store 20 date it no. Added a notice name so Aaron the end they will then Nahas Khanigi, which that ya a all yes Simmons ya to that a the one being the ton and J down to hard Linigi do that a need that old Niha Novaji that ya or according to Navajo Washington Highs aim hidden Navajo Linigi Argent that a yield so do ya hot it's a thing. I don't know that at court Ada shit Anna's cow. Nika did was it no Shamaya on the taggy Hagolanti on the Cabishno Bas Banahas Slaya Enan Dila Etoba in the Basati place. Court Ada March 30, 2022. Eotza. I don't know a yab. Big at home that's Kagido, the Jenda Yagi, and later a 10 days ago, 90 days each Nidia to claim you are a yab nature. Shilla story in Strato list. What is the Shlisto when Nasha Equagi toy behind Enigi? Shilla at a Kashibate at Ninigi. Arotzai a unclaimed list of unclaimed Nigia. The other not so ya nature is to honor a joda a lenigi a eyes. Okay.
So that's where we are now. We're at this spot, the list of unclaimed rights, and I think Casey just said that based on what I could glean. So what is the list of unclaimed rights? It's really the list of rights that nobody filed a claim for. We have them on our records. We had to send notice out to the owner that we have for those rights, that it's on our records. They have the opportunity to file a claim back here. They didn't, and so now they go on this list of unclaimed rights, and the court says, okay, those rights are considered to be forfeited because nobody's there using them. That's all that is. That's the reason we're here today. The statute says we have to have a public meeting and explain that to you, and explain that anybody who says, hey, my right is on that list, but I am using that right still, has an opportunity to file an objection with the court and get their right off the list so that they preserve their right.
At the Hashin so chunch ido lechnenigi joda a yabnasheta. So I need netto spares and about 8 or spars or 8 or OG car. Or that in the Niki pass or kit. So how I need a need just key and I had let all this a punta a quite a choice either. Asian but nature a quite choice in the even nature a budget does let what are a has okay.
Oh, and I should mention you have until August 8th, 2023 to file that objection.
Now that Ada should concentrate slide, I thought that in Lenny a corner that nowadays washing August pay after the 90 days call Ada 10 days so it takes 3 months to do it.
So that's where we are now. Here's where we're going. Our office, led by Mark Stilson and other members of our staff, are investigating the claims that were filed. Again, this part only applies to the state appropriative rights, like Golding's, the Navajo Nation right, the reserve rights is a special category. But once we finish investigating the state appropriative rights, we're going to prepare what's called a proposed determination. And that's basically a document that says, here are the rights, here are the characteristics of the rights. Priority date, place of use, method of use, how it's being used, etc. We submit that to the court, and the reason it's called a proposed determination is because it's our proposal to the court saying, court, here's how we think you should determine, that means describe and adjudicate, the water rights in the Navajo Nation Subdivision. So that's going to happen hopefully next year. Looking forward to that next summer. Then there's another objection process, 90 days to file an objection, public meetings, and then we resolve objections and hopefully get a final court decree.
The proposed determination is now a then source net on the 8 lot Hajo the court then negate will that not don't need a source a Hajo is chain nano negoti I sending this Kagi Aron the Abia not the law Ebic Ahodo Lisnila it was the Anavi I she not that in the judge or that.
Okay, well, we talked a little bit about this. So what is the list of unclaimed rights? As I said, it identifies state-based rights of record that did not receive a water user's claim. And it recommends that the rights are to be considered abandoned by the court. In the Navajo Nation Subdivision, 29 rights did not receive claims, and 22 of those are associated with oil and gas companies. So those oil and gas companies did not come in, file their water rights claims. Assuming they don't object, those water rights will be gone, forfeited, abandoned. And the last, sorry, I'm trying to read the slide. So the last important thing I said already, the Navajo Nation's reserved rights are not affected at all by the list of unclaimed rights.
Natinas ado not so the kidney in the lobster without a the has net. I don't the Natina ki and laha the Katni not either the Bijon a Hatzogi Ecuador a Kahakini ado not Toyi adoya. Claim it a ladder, just know you have what that in the negation a nice cut or this. So what I is keeping that. Okay.
Okay. How can you access the list of unclaimed rights? Recipients of the notice from the list of unclaimed rights were water right owners listed on the records of the state engineer. So if you have a water right, you got the list. Property owners within the Navajo Nation adjudication areas. Registered agents, and then council of record. And if you didn't get the notice that you want, but you want to read the list of unclaimed rights, you can access it on our water rights website, which is waterrights.utah.gov with those slashes. But if you go to waterrights.utah.gov, you can navigate there through the adjudication portion of the website. Hard copies are available at our office for a fee. I think our nearest office is in Price, so it's a bit far away. And it's also been filed at the district court in Moab. So the best and easiest way, in my opinion, if possible, is to access it online.
The Ecuador in his Basin, the water rights is in Unclaimed. Navajo Washington, that is here, Jovada. According to Twana Patient Position in windmill, Ada, visit the Hatoya, Jovada, in the Nigiva, Asian that the Ecuador give it a stop. None of the property of the Navajo Nation within. Ada, the water resource, though. Ada, the visit the Halong, though, and they talk to us at sound. Joda Ada, the visit Dalia, Akodo, numbers of Dalia, what I aid in his Basin. She died not train me that will be quite in hit at 20.
Okay. So what's on the list of unclaimed rights? This list of unclaimed rights is pretty small. Yeah, Ryan, why don't you come up and go through it?
I'll save your voice a little bit.
Much appreciated.
So this is the part where we're just going to go through the actual document of the unclaimed rights, just so you can get a familiarity with it. See if your name's on there, make sure that anything you would be preserved if you wanted to get it off. One thing to also mention is, even if a Navajo use has a state-based water right that gets abandoned, they still can claim that water right through the Navajo settlement side of it as well. So you can keep both, you can go one way or the other, however you would prefer to do that. We don't see too many Navajo rights on this though. So the list of unclaimed rights has about 6 parts to it. First is the title page. It's got some general information that you'll be needing if you want to file an objection. It's got the notice to water users, which is basically the state engineer's statement of the notice, or of the list of unclaimed rights. It's got a preamble, which is basically the legal part of it, which kind of documents the legal part, or how the list of unclaimed rights was created and what gives them the authority to do so. There's a location map showing the general location of the Adjudication subdivision. And then there's the meat of it, which is the unclaimed rights, which is actually a list of the rights that we are making a recommendation to be abandoned. And then there's also an alphabetical index of the water right owners by their name, so that if you don't know the water right number, you can look there and reference it.
Did I not so space on ya, but you have lady, ask him, escape not out a yard budget of a car. As say a large title, I dump a car, Asian quite a you have lady. I don't notice of water rights, it's clinic, a one that not users, it's clinic, a la hela a to that was clinic, those she that the other, it's case. Nana ko in Navajo Washington, she is large a Beji Ahido to a contour had us, Nana is to DJ that is conditionally upon the like is that budget that long that a taking that other preamble is Nini, Betty leaders, yeah, what I think Nini a yesterday. Around the Ehune the Kodo to had us, Ado to the Satnas Ligi, Ada not based on, and that the whole car is kidding, J. Map. When the Egi Hela Ehunet, I don't that nation, it at unclaimed rights, is Nigi, Asian corn, I don't dash so they so that in the Nigi. Around the HK on the alphabetical index is not Joda, okay.
So this is the title page, and there's some pieces of information that I want to point out on here that you can take if you were looking to reference this. First piece is, this is the district court jurisdiction.
What day baby did JIR is the actually be told you with the car, yeah. Okay.
This is the general adjudication description, kind of roughly doing the entire court case of this piece.
Sad because Nelly in Ada Betty did was done at height and he gave up a car.
This is the judge and civil case number, if you were trying to reference that through the court system.
Had it light a basin go with David Ada Betty Lato Betty Tilly.
This is our hydrologic division and subdivision names, the San Juan River Division, the Navajo Nation Subdivision.
Ako kujini twa so ye what are even nature county snigi ya San Juan River Division snigi with up a car harder than the Athens and Northern Gorge ARGE Navajo cat in the gate San Juan. Okay.
And the last piece is the area number and book. This is just where or how the state engineer has categorized all their water rights in this area.
The lay nas Nashigin did Justin Satagi Ishin the Bedi lead and Jonon not so key on the Ligi with Car ARGA had Adi days evil Asian dog are not in native dog as a key national okay.
The next part is the notice to water users. Like I said, just kind of the state engineer's statement of what this is and how to interact with it. But the important piece here is this is the instructions for filing an objection. It basically states that you have to file both a written objection and a statement of claim of use of water with the district court, which would be the 7th district in Moab for Grand County and all the other associated ones with this subdivision.
This is a giant latter. A change cut on Nenigi. A Yaban Nasha Baby, so no yet. Sarkis and Kiss and Neligi, a day sleep, but I kick out they sleep Nenigi. Nana shade out than Nenigi is all, it of the Sarim is a job car. Hayla Jane they sleep up, Jabia, Nanas, Neligi, and Nanis Kedoli.
So this is the next part. This is the actual unclaimed rights. So this is the list of the rights we're recommending to be abandoned. Just general pieces of information here. This is the water right number. This is the number that is associated with that file on the state engineer's records. This is the name of the owner of record on the state engineer's records. And then this is the point of diversion, identified by a public land survey system designation, and the source of the water. This one's an underground water well, but if it had a name, such as a spring or the river, it would be recognized here.
Rangeland, around the Asia, without area, look that then with other in general, the satellite knowing in the so without a coordinates or yeah, X and Y. Out of Pujigi, a township range without a car, the HK on it, without alien heart, in lateral HK on it. Okay.
And so this is just a list of people you can contact if you've got questions.
Other side, the rib, the car non neligi, so not the kiss, no single. She's not so some the house, other just had a need of never and died this kid. Did the image of Dosna, Adan Hanis Kagi, a what are the niche inky, a what are a sab Kagi, pushing up a car to whom I thought the Koto basic KCE, Jada, a bit touching Nisoya, they will just like a or the email. What are the double card, the yard in Leniki? I don't know, I seen database dish install area has netla so that a water rights underscore adjudication at utah.gov the AGD Quadoben Kisnahas Chadol Kisto and Zonobe Kisnahan net or less without a Lenigi. Just like when it is a Nenny clean, I don't like it eat hand. I just without Ardo Dila A Big on dish Kisto Adan a Cadenda Eba Shispahazan A Niskido a big Yeshin Nenigita. Okay.
So I think that's all we have as part of the unclaimed rights. I'll let Sarah take over.
Thanks, Ryan. That was really helpful. Okay, so next we're going to have Liz and Virginia come up for a minute and talk about what they're working on. Oh, thank you. You've got 3. There you go.
So I'm Liz Sparks, like I said earlier today, for most of you that were there. I am the trust officer for Eastern Navajo, Shiprock, and Hopi, and I'm off in the office in Crown Point in Mexico. I've been out trying to find a lot of our whereabouts unknown, and we have a lot of them. Those are folks that are actual allotee holders, but we don't know where they are. We have a system that if we get return mail, checks, anything like that, they freeze their account so that someone's not getting checks, money, statements they shouldn't be getting. And our list is growing and growing, especially since the pandemic. So that's what we're looking for. I pulled up the Utah allotments in particular, and it's amazing how many whereabouts unknown we have on there. I have a feeling there's quite a few of those folks that are also deceased. But we need the families to, bring us a death certificate or what have you. So I was talking to some people earlier, and I think probably what we'll be doing is coming out and having a couple of more meetings just with latis to see if we can find them. The other thing to remember is that if we have corrected and updated addresses, we'll probably receive notices easier. So I think it's important to make sure that's done. That's all I got. Oh, you go.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Virginia Moore. I'm the fiduciary trust officer for I'm at the Gallup Regional Office, so I handle the Gallup office and the Arizona agencies, the Western Navajo, Chenry, and Port Defiance Agency. And I will also be handling Raymo pretty soon as well. As Liz mentioned, we do have a long list of whereabouts unknown, and we appreciate anybody's help to get addresses, or if there's death that needs to be reported. We appreciate your help, and you can call, since ANIF is under Shiprock Agency, Liz handles that. Oljato, this area is under Western Navajo. So that's why I'm here, is to work with the people that live here. So you can request meetings, you can call my office, we can set up something. I can make contact with the BIA Realty in Tuba City. I think all the folks that I have worked with over there, BIA Realty, have retired. So the new person I have not met, but yeah, so that's I'm glad to be here, and glad to work with you guys. I did have meetings over at the Oljato chapter before, and we did have meetings here before. This is prior to the pandemic.
The old chapter's condemned. The old chapter's condemned.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh.
because of asbestos, they
Oh,
went and
gosh.
demolished that. So this is where we have our meeting, chapter meetings and raising meetings and you name it. Dia yesterday I didn't know Slimigi high so high. Not so a lot maybe Slimigi. It's like it's a die day with our around the nana store, Hashi net a just kilo. 1/4 acres of the use the clan were a Daka Yazi by Yastika Nisha, so that in the Ishi Bata Kayati. Because a lot of land I use. Because what dated never Jones our site is a die they know for a with better husband. Now sausage in this sausage in a cow, they would even not a husband. I called Asa Washington, Hana, the Shinhana, Azo Don Gilchehona. She put out Western Agency, the Assad in Michigan, Paul Johnson was a real teacher. She had added the Pijata Hosnet or Kodo a lot of land, that Kayazero, that size of Daigisha has no other Satikli Samosan or Jay Pijata Hosnet Kisna. It don't so he had it or he had so do they.
Thank you. So now we're going to turn our time over to Justin Record of the Bureau of Reclamation, and he's going to talk a little bit about the Hydrographic Survey that the federal government has been doing.
You're welcome to join me, Gary.
In other words.
Gary's trying to hide.
Yeah.
You know, one of the main reasons we're having this discussion is we just wanted to make you aware of this effort. So when you see Gary and his teammates out working, you kind of know what they are doing. This slide is more of the overall purpose, which we've already covered, but I'm just going to comment that as we are implementing this settlement, we are focused on a couple key efforts to get this settlement, the funds of this settlement released, and to get the water associated with this settlement, the water rights fully recognized and enforceable in court. So the court adding the decree to the water rights gets them their final step to becoming a fully recognized and vested water right. And as a federal government, we're working with the state of Utah to make that happen. And we're working with the Navajo Nation to make that happen for the Navajos claimed water rights. So, we already talked about the signing ceremony in Monument Valley. That was a key step. We conformed the 15 settlement to match the legislation that passed in December 2020. And then we will sign. That's the Hydrographic Survey, which I'll talk about in a minute, is ongoing work that we are doing just to document the historic uses. And the reason that we document them is for the Navajo Nation in part, so they know what water is being used within the reservation boundary, and also per the water rights agreement, there are extra protections given to uses that predate the agreement. And so we want to make sure that we have as complete a picture as possible of the water uses that have predated the agreement. The Department of Justice has filed for this adjudication a claim for this big settlement water right, that 81,000 acre feet of water right. The federal government has filed a claim with the Navajo Nation for all those rights to be recognized. And that's different than this list of unclaimed water right. It's one big filing, and it's for the whole settlement. And it's for all reserved land within the Navajo Nation of Utah. There are also 70 individual allotments. These are not held by the Navajo Nation as a whole. They're held by individuals. Many of them are Navajo members but they're within the reservation boundaries. So these are small pieces of land that have their own water rights, and we filed claims for all those water right allotments. And these two water rights that were filed by the federal government are a little different than state rights. State rights can get abandoned, they can be forfeited, but the federal rights are recognized in perpetuity. They have different rules. And so the purpose of this meeting is primarily to talk about the state rights But since we are here, we wanted to make the distinction so there wouldn't be confusion that there are these federal rights that will not be diminished, that have been filed for and that will continue going forward. And we are here to help with however needed to complete the adjudication process. It's a state-led process, but the federal government has to participate. We have to file claims on behalf of the Navajo Nation. And we have done that. We will continue to work with the state until the decree is issued by the judge and these water rights are finalized. We have, the settlement was passed. When it was passed in 2020, it was passed just saying we will support the settlement. 2020 wasn't when the funds were set apart, but since 2020, December 2020, and today, Congress has appropriated the federal piece of the money. And indexing it to inflation, because that's part of the legislation, it has grown to $250 million. That money has been set aside and secured in a separate account, so it can be left untouched until we complete the steps of the settlement. And once we complete the steps of the settlement, that money is released, is made available to the Navajo Nation, and the Navajo Nation will come with projects and can request the funding. The process essentially is they make requests for the funding to cover water development within the state of Utah and can use the money. It can be combined with other funding sources too. So it's just one tool for the Navajo Nation that can be combined, can be used in a variety of ways to develop water. Gary, you want to?
Yeah, Gary Jordan, Kill Western Bonashnish, Phil Crew Tanashnish. The hot Iranchi is a Dalia, Haikishi, Banaste, Aro Survey, Lini, Anibani, Kray, Aro DOJ. Asiada na South Hadadi la Washington Navajo water rights but aro allotment so Asiada Bahadadia allotment so Dean Kaya also allotment Islini aro based on Shino Ada Washington based on that na kinzat dino manishla din de mil so a kai hashi ishata de Nila, you can chop anytime you want. Okay. Ako shida ba he needs ya udat ein leni needs ke leni koni traut kharawa and lede nkhastqui ane yedalni Lebek la CCC days they snoya. Ishi atesh nenegi Civil Conservation Corps. Tadokai. Edi shingot andi saho tobi nazi lo sadi sa yan anira dat yage nada. Sazang in ti aro toha tendano. Without a corny selking lenigi hesido upon that shinoi carded that I don't live without not any niche. Asked that we would not about the Hanozi, should that even Shiaho Aya, the Benanch Kado, that a twish would only the Toswahana, as for Toinish only a Sabian, I don't that leave your non nation there. I see that Neil Khan just like that Egi that Steve a condition that as a Pina got dano. I wrote that the Bishna Pahido so Hanan I wrote that negated the Tlaya. Amen has so that ain't lending a stone that Shinoyana Creek. Of course, I get that the clay tweet in that cash. Is that at a car day that. Nana it all nothing to lately could I has negi. Na kid is not the those that the mail so nenegi. Edo bohot nita, what are a base of chidos, isobe, he would argue is lado neniki. Navajo Washington lick a niece e Argentina. Kodo e Hikedat enigi chapter resolution. Sadwadanadi aheolia. Di a e base of chidon is. Adon da ishi kodo not ani ye peshpansa anibansis. Hone la egg at the legi hat the in laser kodo besos and hat behones nana e kodo chidon is. Habaka dol tras. Adon da e ashlat din that and quake at the legi toba has no over late. So that a yina the store legi at that ain the nigi. Upon the Epa had the Nigi Epa Yashki again, Hindley Tunanis, the Arjun Date, Nashile, Bitsonia, a Curly Valley, the Hashnani, Cropland Management Plan, Bahal Speed, a yin dado, Nashil ad, a double car, based on a lap bahado lately. I got Basiada at 8 at the Tlegi, the agricultural land use permit de what are even not ge that okay according on so borden how they travel all yeah has an hat it's a story what are the car she that the visit of a cargo no koroski on the story so that that the dark and then again we don't eat I don't they all get that later list Nata na yeza cheshiyan aron tasait or what and nenigation that egation benache. I want so the ebe had this to adish net and hanoya hagi that is most agi he would a yabe has sit or list in an corner and get away and then again honach car on Karava according the I had net adi gato Aron Hin Kodobin Tobin Yenasha, Honash Ka Evanasha, ask it that Hochivinos Enash, a condash of Kahno J, a conda Danshanoyanaga, Arodi conda Bashin Six Chasey ye niche, or that Aronat Shiraz, that I dasha in La, Arohe Ato, Ajit is Shekhan, Yehan, Nikaya. Geez, kid, so I thought in la David is now there. That as he dato with the niece teacher that was any ayacho that. I knew what I based on our end zone, Naski, she had a go Willie response, I go lay Naski, Navajo Mountain Water Association, Ajit. Ako that ain lenigi the Colorado River do ajita nena has come. Ako that ain lenigi be not at go ena nei jo that a honsen so in lela badat a lola lela ebenal so lola that ain lenigi be nasha foten. They don't so bad this do here for don hanan lenigi Gary do not ani lenigi Justin, thank you for helping us out putting all that and GPS and putting everything on there.
So the step I haven't talked about was the hydrographic survey, and the hydrographic survey is a documentation of the historic uses on the Navajo reservation. It is the best. It's the best. It's for us to do our due diligence to understand what's to use. So we have talked with the Navajo Nation and gathered their maps. We have looked at aerial photos of the area to try to see what they might show. We now spend time on the ground. We have hired Gary and Keller. He works for Keller Blissner, so we've hired Keller Blissner. They're an engineering firm. They have a crew out here working. You may see them, except in Monument Valley. I did notice that the Oljato chapter is where they started their work, so they have done the most in this area. But they are going to cover all the chapters within Utah. This is just showing kind of where they are in the process, of where they think they are. They can always find new rights, but they are visiting section by section and looking on the ground with their eyes and talking to the people who live there to try to understand what the history of the water use has been in the area. They look for wells, they look for windmills, they look for water troughs, they look for dams, for the embankments of dams that have washed out, but they look for evidence of current use and past use, and they get as much of it as they can, and they put it in here into a database. This database will have a few pictures to help people know what things look like on the ground, and so if someone wants to come out and take a look for it, they can. But this is going to be given to the Navajo Nation. It's going to be used in conjunction with the water rights agreement as they move forward. So they understand how much of the 81,000 has been used historically, and they can make sure that those rights receive the extra protection that the agreement grants them because of their age going forward. You want to say anything, Gary?
Die Utah, kujaha, so give me die the sheet and the Lade ya kana squat. Conde Oljato Quaggy. I see kana squat. I don't put it in hot so Mexican water. I could toy kana. Red Mesa, I saw line see. I don't know how mountain old cabby like the outcredin the sheepness. I'll let all the letter. It like in our car. They out and told it, he told us the need had a need told us the springs or wells at a windmills. I don't touch that any water source. Or water use here. It cannot fence posted as under. If we can see a fence post, then we can count it or anything else. Other ponds are so. Todaresten had a nitra. Ne Bokota, they springs are done in Todas, Lenny, set top at the end. It's what they need trap. And the another lady tradition or ETV, they many times covered the other children. How than they didn't say. Ebony Crable Leo, the Hogano thought, and it Kakari car in our sauce. Did Kari did Nanga did Kilo had that and it down and no had it called us leader Ebikaho. I don't hear all that.
And I was saying, they are not done. They still have a lot of work to do. They will be working through this summer and into next summer, which is when they hope to get done sometime next summer. So if you see Gary and his crews, they may be on ATVs, they may be walking, they may be going from door to door. That's what they are doing. That's all I have for the Hydrographic Survey. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah,
Justin,
Yes.
just 1 minute.
right by Navajo Mountain, you have like a ziggly line. What is that?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. We our program, you can't really put a line unless it's like a ditch has something to do with water. So this is actually a trail machine. It's a trail that will probably, when we're in the area, so we can find that trail where we can go. And once we're in the area, we'll take it off. And this is the same right here. This is right by Mule Ear Bigahi. I don't know if you guys know where Mule Ear is. Right by
Chinle Wash, so it's not part of the, it's not like ditch or anything.
There's 9 trails at Paiute Canyon.
Yeah.
There's only one noted all the way from the north to the south.
Paiute Trail.
Paiute Canyon.
Paiute? You know what?
Paiute
Yeah.
Canyon
Somewhere in this area, right?
is Paiute Mesa is this one right here.
Paiute Mesa?
Paiute Mesa. This Paiute Canyon is right
Oh,
next to it. So you have work only at the base of the mountain right here.
Oh.
2 places. But there's other sources down here on this side and also in this region.
Yeah.
And there's a aquifer in here that supports the spring coming out of the canyon here. So you might have to take about 2 weeks to complete your survey down there. There's a whole bunch of donkeys, but somebody already collected the skin, so there's only a few running around down there.
Yeah, we haven't done any work over here except for these right here. So donkeys really help because they have a trail, they make trail to water source. So on the image you can see those. So
If you want to look for water, just follow the trail. Isn't not only a question.
More questions?
Taking that name.
South of block of Highway 191, a Mexican water area. In 1950s, the oil company did a lot of drilling in the area, and the Navajo sandstone aquifer is not too far down. So a lot of the water just came out, and they tried to stop them, but every time the sand shift, it comes back up. We used some of those springs that before the drillings that were coming out, like a badger or some animals would dig it out, and it would come out. That's what my family used for livestock culinary and irrigation in the area. But I don't know, I think Mark came around with some people, I don't remember you. Yeah, so I'm just wondering about that, if that has been surveyed in that area.
We're working on that right now. Most of it's done.
The other concern I had was before 1868, when the treaty was signed between the federal government and the Navajo Nation, Navajo people resorted down to the confluence of Colorado River, San Juan River, and they used, as far as I can remember or understand, time immemorial, the Navajos have access and the use of the San Juan River, Colorado River. How does that impact? Is that shed any light on it? So, in that sense, the confluent residents were using the Colorado River, San Juan River. How does that register? Is there any indication? And, you know, a lot of times, during that time, 1930s, the late 1920s, 1930s, there was plenty of precipitation on the Navajo Nation. I assume the jet stream was blessing them from the northwest. Since that time, 1930s, I believe the climate change has taken a toll and begun to move the jet stream up north, where it is crossing the Rocky Mountains to the east now. So, in that sense, a lot of those areas like on Paiute Mesa, there was fields of corn, melons, and whatnot. Self-sufficiency was then. There was no supermarket. There was no trading post. People resorted to their annual planting, harvesting, and storing their goods for the winter. That's how self-sufficient they were in that time. So how are they registered under the state so we can possibly submit some claims? But those people that have lived in those times have passed on.
Right.
So
yeah, that's a really good question. So I can answer a little bit of that, and maybe Justin and Gary can talk about their work on it. And so we all of us in this room recognize there were people here before the Navajo United States Treaty that ultimately created the nation, the reservation. The law, the federal law and state law says that priority dates start when you start, in the case of the Navajo Nation, that's when that document was signed with the federal government.
that is a
I understand that feeling.
that is totally absurd.
The thing I will say is that our estimates, when we were looking through, and when I say we, I mean the negotiating team, the federal government, ourselves, the state, and the Navajo Nation government, looked at existing uses on the nation in the state of Utah, and it looks about 10,000 acre feet. But recognizing that there's a lot more development that could happen, and the idea of a tribal reserve right is to create a homeland for the people in perpetuity. So that's why, along with some numbers that we could get into a little bit more, we came up with the 81,500 acre feet number. And it is to encourage development of water use for fields, like you were talking about around Paiute Mesa, Navajo Mountain, and other places like that. So the idea is to create, to give enough water to the nation within the state of Utah to create a permanent homeland, a livable homeland, not just a subsistence homeland, but a livable homeland for the people. Yes, ma'am.
That is the first straw supposed to be the water law. And the Navajos had the first straw.
Yep, I understand.
And that
Yeah.
is supposed to be perpetuity.
Yeah.
Instead of going back behind closed doors and saying, hey, state laws and federal law says this. That is absolutely damaging to the Navajo standard of living.
Yeah, I understand.
Stay in poverty. That's what I hear.
Well, that is definitely not the state's goal, and that was not the state's goal in signing this agreement. The state's goal was to provide the portion of our Colorado River allocation, 81,500 acre feet, that would be sufficient to meet the nation's needs into the future. And again, before the agreement was signed in 2020, we estimated about 10,000 acre feet. There are 81,000 acre feet available. So we're hopeful that poverty will not be the standard moving forward.
Well, that's another
Yes,
part of simulation.
I understand. Yeah.
And we're not trying to we want to cover everything that's happened in the past, but we want to cover more than that. And, I don't, We want to cover what has happened up until now. You talk about those mesas having water, and it would be wonderful if I could see them. I'd love to be here when that happened. We want to cover all those uses.
Yes.
But we want to cover more than that. We want to cover everything that you will need for the next 1,000 years, or whatever time that is. It's in perpetuity. It needs to be a resource for you forever. That is what we are trying. That is what was being negotiated.
That's right.
Between the state, the federal government, and the federal government, has a trust responsibility to the tribe. So we try to work with the tribe in negotiating the needs of the tribe into the future.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. The gentleman had stated that farm use lands like a fence post, those existing things would be counted in that. Well, we also harvest a lot of indigenous plants, and those are not fenced in. Those are usually just open fields, and a lot of times they can migrate to where the water source is. So because of that, how is Navajo Nation documenting those, and then also how does that work with this adjudication for water usage, because they rely on the natural source of, the way the water runs, or the way, how the rain falls, all of those things. Precipitation, the natural precipitation of the land to the land. What about those? Because a lot of us that live in these local communities, we know where these indigenous food sources are.
Right.
But we don't fence them in.
Well, and just talk for a matter of principle, a lot more water rains in Utah than we have a water right for. And what comes from the heavens and hits the ground, you don't have to have a water right for that. The indigenous plants usually don't need a water right. A water right is when you're pulling water from the stream and putting it to make something grow where it wouldn't grow otherwise. You're pulling water from a well. Now, the Navajo Nation will be responsible for administering their water, and that's the part of this agreement. They just make those decisions, but I will just say that in other Western states, native vegetation doesn't need a water right, and it's just part of nature, and it can exist as it is. Water right is only needed when you're changing nature and doing something different than what's been done historically. Or what Mother Nature would do.
With the climate change, that's a big problem. Like you said, we have no precipitation, hardly any where we live. So all the vegetation that were there for our livestock, it's gone. And then we have the feral horses that just eat them to the ground, and we can't receive anymore. So that's a concern. That's a big concern for us. Me, I try to cultivate some of those indigenous plants. That's in my premises where I live. See, I can start seeds again. But that is one problem we have to take into consideration. Can we do that, cultivate what used to be the indigenous plant that used to live there that the people use as a food source for livestock?
That's a great point. Climate change is changing history, and we don't know what will be needed in the future. I don't have that crystal ball, but as a water right principle, we try to be generous because what has happened in the past might be changed in the future, and you might need to divert more water from the rivers in the future.
My point is, because indigenous plants aren't gardens or farm areas, those fields are left open. How are those going to be counted? Because a lot of times we see something, we'll try to water it too ourselves. Those are the things that we do within local communities where we know those are still in existence.
So if you're watering, what I'm hearing is you are augmenting some of the natural conditions by adding water on native plants, and that is irrigation. That does count as a use. And so that would be something that we hope would get caught in the Keller Listener survey that's going on.
And even if it's not, I will acknowledge up front that it's sometimes impossible to catch everything. We're not omniscient. But we hope to catch there will be more, we know there'll be more water use than what we are showing, and I would hope that everyone who looks at this will recognize that this is what we can see, but there is more going on. The settlement protects water use even if it's not in the survey. The settlement will protect all uses that predate the settlement and protect those that postdate the settlement. We haven't talked about that, but the future uses, this future need that you need, the settlement gives Navajo preference over future uses to even the state's future uses, in that it has this 1881 priority. Sorry, gotta get my date right. Most of the water is 1881, and that still predates state rights. And so your future uses get the 1881 priority date for the bulk of it. There were some smaller blocks, and I don't have that in front of me, but those blocks represent the bulk of the reservation was set aside in 1881. And so that's the water right date that the reserve water right holds. And that's the water right date you will have in the future as you have to put new water to use.
Yeah, I believe that's over 62,000 acre feet, something in that range, which is quite a significant portion of the 81,500. And the other thing I will say, so the state, for outside of the reservation, the state is the State Division of Water Rights is the agency that administers water rights within the state. How those water rights can be used. Mark and his team go out and help people figure out how they can use their water rights, what the priority date is, get this paperwork done, all that kind of stuff. For the nation's rights, those types of administrative actions go through the nation. So those are questions, I think those are really good questions, and questions I think that can also be brought up with your own government internally, yeah. But speaking just as a human being and not as a lawyer and not as a representative of the state, I think that cultivating native plants and foods is just as important as anything else. So I hope that there's room for adding the water rights, yeah. Yes?
Quick question. On your chart there, it shows Anna and Oljato being 90, plus 80% completion. Now, the other chapters, are you going to go to those chapters as you're doing it here at some point in time?
Yes, we will continue. The work will continue until it is done. And we are scheduled to be done next summer with the field work. And then there will be about 6 months of putting this all together in a report. And that will be, then it'll be passed off to the Navajo Nation.
Within these public hearings, of the people's comments, where do they fit into this whole process?
That's a really good question, because we're kind of here for a multitude of purposes that don't always fit within the exact statutory purpose of this individual meeting. This individual meeting is specifically about the list of unclaimed rights, but since we're down here, we decided we wanted to include the federal government and some other voices into this discussion because we know there are questions. So for the state and the Division of Water Rights, we are listening to you and we're hearing you and we understand the concerns. At this point, our role is really specific and it's really just tied to this court process, which is the adjudication. In terms of the Navajo Nation's reserved rights, those rights, as far as the state is concerned, are safe, they're good. We're going to put them in our proposed determination, which is our proposal to the court, and say, court, we want you to recognize these water rights exactly as we have all agreed to, the federal government, the nation, the state, memorialize them in a decree, and make them effective in perpetuity. In terms of a lot of the other questions that I'm hearing, I've heard this morning, I've heard questions about how money's going to get used for water projects. What kinds of water rights will be recognized under the Navajo Nation's rights? What kinds of uses are important? How are these rights going to account for climate change? I think, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of the concerns. Oh, water quality, that's another issue. Those are the tip of the iceberg. And, and I think a lot of those questions aren't really questions that we can answer through the adjudication process or even through the survey process. I think it has to be an ongoing discussion with how projects are developed and where our three different sovereigns have authority and jurisdiction, how we can work together. One area where the state of Utah does have some ability to help the nation is on water quality matters, and that's something we're committed to doing.
I appreciate that. And You know, this is the water rights settlement, so it's to recognize water rights. It does set aside a water right development fund, but that is not the only federal program out there that helps the tribe, and we continue to work with BIA. Reclamation has technical assistance programs of its own. You know, I know the Army Corps works with the Navajo Nation, so there are other opportunities to get federal money to help with local needs. My encouragement would be to explore all the options. I'm excited to get this piece of the money together to be one tool for the Navajo to use, but it's not the only tool to develop your future water needs.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah. Just thinking about the. Now I've lost my train of thought. Oh gosh, what was it? Talk about water quality.
Yeah.
So, who can tell us what that means? Are they going to be some kind of filtering system that will be installed somewhere somehow, so we can have that quality water? And that's what I think is the biggest concern right now, because we understand the existing aquifers are all have so many contaminants, and we're using it for all purposes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, I don't have specifics on water quality today. I think that the Navajo Nation's Water Development Commission is working on that issue. And I know that the state of Utah and the Water Development Commission have been talking about ways to help water quality on the nation. There are other projects under consideration, including bringing water from Sweetwater into the state of Utah. That's a preliminary discussion. We're talking about it. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. There's a lot of engineering to do. That's just one idea. There was a consideration of a variety of projects in various planning documents, and they've all been talked about. And the way I look at this is, I know I don't have a lot of answers for you. I know Justin doesn't have a ton of answers for you. This is step one in getting this tool for you so that your government and you folks on the ground can put this water to use in a way that makes sense for your communities and for your economic futures as well.
And we will, we want to support the development of water on the Navajo Reservation, and we are concerned with water quality. So we'll work with the Navajo Nation to come up, to lend our support and our expertise where we can. We think this is helpful, but we know that there's a lot more out there that needs to be done.
I have seen the water development plan under the Navajo Department of Water Resource. Ms. Cordova, and their drawings, as I understand, it will be the water drawn from somewhere upstream, Shiprock, Gadia, somewhere, and brought it across the Clapato to Tisa's Bus, Four Corners, Annis, Red Mesa, what's the other one? Mexican Water. Those are the areas that will be receiving that particular water development project. The other project that is slated for Oljato is from Hachita, or Mexican Hat. That water is going to be develop a water transmission line to Oljato and that area. But nothing for Navajo Mountain, the most neglected community of the Navajo Nation, the most remote Navajo community of the Navajo Nation, state of Utah, San Juan County, Coconino County, Navajo County of the state of Arizona. Dry as a camel.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's one of those questions. How do we get water to the most remote parts of the nation? And I'm hopeful, and again, I do not speak for the nation. I speak barely for the state of Utah, kind of. And I cannot, the nation is its own sovereign entity. It's up to them to decide. It's up to you all as constituents of the nation to decide how that water will be allocated, how the resources will be used, and how you can get clean, reliable water to communities that need it most. And I'm sorry I don't have answers for you, I really am. But I really do appreciate you coming and talking to us about this, because these are important.
I still talking about quality. Is it gonna be one treatment plant? There has to be a treatment plant if it's gonna be for domestic use. Because that river is not top quality.
No, we understand.
As far as gold mine spill, the contaminant is still in the system.
So Willie, you're correct. When the negotiations first started, there were two projects that were talked about, but we walked away from those to come up with something more flexible. So now it's just 250 million. And there is no projects in the legislation. There's nothing that's mandated that has to be built. It is up to the Navajo Nation to figure out what to use the money for.
So you can propose those type of projects.
I already have a plan.
There you go.
So we have a gentleman in the back, sorry. Sir, in the back.
So, gentleman kind of answered a little bit of that. My question was, if the Navajo Nation has shared those kinds of projects, a list of projects with you guys, and is that some of those projects, is that gonna benefit what the adjudication? How are you gonna implement that into the adjudication?
Yeah, so the adjudication really doesn't have anything to do with the projects. The 81,500, the 258 million, that's sacrosanct, that's part of the settlement, that will go in the adjudication. All the adjudication does is the court basically blesses the agreement and says, this is a decreed water right, it's recognized under state law, it's recognized under federal law, and it is owing to the Navajo Nation. Because it's a reserved right, it is not a state right, it can't be forfeited like a state right. So it's sacrosanct. It is then really just within the purview of the Navajo Nation and your government to decide how you want to use and administer that water from there. The state and the federal government has a different relationship, of course, with the nation than the state does, but we are just here as we can be to help. So I've gotten a call a month or so ago from Navajo Nation folks looking at other projects, needing our just some thoughts from us and maybe some assistance on some of the legal side. That kind of a thing, we're here to help, but we are not the leaders on how to use the Navajo water.
And I will add, I heard in your list, have we seen a list of projects for the settlement money? And assuming I heard correctly, I have not. And when the settlement money gets released, and that's when we finish the adjudication, the Navajo at that point can send us a spend plan. They can tell us what they want to spend the money on, and it gets released from the trust fund as long as that money is being spent for water needs within the state of within the reservation and within the state of Utah.
That's right.
But I have not seen the list, and I believe this Navajo Nation is right now looking to work on that list, but I don't believe they have started yet. I think they're just beginning the efforts, but this is a question I would ask the Water Development branch, and a question I would have for them to make sure that critical needs are on that list, on their list.
One more question real quick.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
last month there was legislation to combine the local and federal at the state. Can you explain a little bit about that and see? Want to know a little more information on that?
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
It had to do with the local water rights and the federal. Basically, I think this was brought up to adjudication, trying to combine the two under one court. I think that's what I heard.
Okay, I'm not sure that there was any legislation at the state level regarding adjudications. In fact, there wasn't. What I think maybe you're thinking is the state of Utah issued a summons to the federal government. We served actually the Attorney General, as we're required to do under federal statute, and said, okay, federal government, you're joined in this Navajo Nation adjudication. You have to file claims just like anybody else. And one of the claims they have to file is on behalf of the Navajo Nation. They also have to file any BLM rights they might have. There's some national monument claims for the Hoven Creek National Monument, for example. They have to file those as well within the Navajo Nation Subdivision. So maybe that's what you're thinking of. I'm not exactly sure what legislation otherwise there would be.
Okay. Yeah, I did read. There was a brief description that I read on the web, so I was just kind of wanting to know about that and see if it had ties to this.
Yeah.
And if there was going to be any kind of conflict with this.
No, it's just part of there's a lot of important legal notifications and due process matters that we have to follow to make sure that we have authority as the state, and the state courts have authority and jurisdiction to adjudicate these rights. And actually, this is a very rare instance in which federal government agencies have to appear in state courts. It's on water rights, such as the Navajo rights. So, yeah, I think that might be what you're thinking of. And if you think of something else, I'm happy to answer.
And I will note that we're not making a state right out of the reserved rights.
No.
The reserved rights are federal rights and are separate from the state system. They have their unique federal protections, which is why they can't be forfeited, which is why they can't be abandoned. They are in perpetuity. It's why we have to have a water rights agreement and we have to agree with the Navajo Nation and the state so that this permanent future use is recognized by all the parties and can be protected into the future.
And that court decree, the reason we're here, the adjudication, that's what protects it into perpetuity. Yes, ma'am.
I'm from this area.
Yes.
I'm the chapter vice president for the local area, a leader for the local area. And I just had a question on the state and also the Navajo Nation community rights. I feel like the Belagana, I'm gonna say Belaganas. I'm gonna be very a traditional person here. Every time there's this type of things that come on, you guys come out and you guys head spear everything. And the Navajo Nation is really slow at these. Even our community government is really slow at attacking these type of laws of water. And it seems like we get over-conquered by the Utah State, by the Belaganas. And they just come in and they do their job. And here we are, we're still trying to make ends meet, trying to get through our laws, the Navajo Nation laws, the chapter laws, and you guys just come in, head spirit, and beat us to it every time. Is there a way you are working with our government where it's like everybody's a winner here? That's it, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And I just want to say that I think First of all, we really are trying to work with the nation. We have a 3 sovereign agreement, standing shoulder to shoulder. The state of Utah, the Navajo Nation, the federal government, all signed this agreement regarding the settlement of the 81,500 acre feet. And your government in Window Rock was representing you as the Utah Navajo, and along with us at the state and the federal government. We do not want in any way to come down here and tell the nation how to use its reserved right. That is not what the state is here for. That is not what the federal government is here for. That 81,500, that's the nation's right, and the nation gets to decide how to use it. The Water Development Commission gets to decide how to use it, how to allocate it. And what's more, I just want to emphasize this again, that 81,500 acre feet is for use by the nation in the state of Utah. It is not for use in New Mexico, on the reservation in New Mexico, and not in Arizona. It is for this state and for the people who live here. So the entire purpose of that large amount of water is for the people in Utah to figure out how they want to use it and put it to use here. How the money gets allocated, how that water gets administered, that's up to your government. And it's definitely not our place at all, or the federal government's place at all.
One thing I understand, there's a ceiling on $250,000 million. There's a ceiling on $8 million from the state. There's a ceiling on 81,500 acre feet of water. No room. Nothing beyond that. What about if we build a city, do we need more water?
And we would hope that 81.
That is, again, I don't know what, that's what she's talking about. There's no flexibility.
So the amount of water under the settlement would allow you to build a city the size of Salt Lake.
But we want more than that.
Well, there's nothing stopping you from appropriating more.
Right.
So, you know, our feet are huddled.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yes,
If
sir.
we're talking about growth and development,
Well,
how can we grow and develop? We want the water, our water now, today, and for the future growth and development. That's what we're looking at.
right, and I believe that I think that's what the 81,500 is intended for. It's a quite a large amount of water. It's significantly more than we estimated was being used in the state of Utah by the Navajo Nation at the time of the agreement, which was about 10,000 acre feet. So the hope is that you can take that 81.5 and develop however you want, wherever you want in this area. Go ahead, Mark.
It's important to point out too that 81.5 is depletion.
That's correct.
So we measure our reporting to the Colorado River, the other Colorado River Basin states in depletion. That means water is consumed, 100% consumed. So in reality, you can divert way more than 81.5. You can divert almost 300,000 acre feet if you're using it for residential use. So that 81.5 is only a ceiling in terms of what is consumed. What you divert you can divert quite
Yeah.
And it is also only a ceiling under the reserved right. It is not a limit on how much water you could acquire through state administrative processes if you wanted additional water on top of that. So just like anybody else, you could go out and file an application for a water right with the state of Utah and say, this is my plan for putting water to use. So that's,
Aside from the,
you could, yeah. But
And
this
additional-
81,500 is a significant amount of water that has a much better priority date than you would get if you filed for an application to appropriate. And so I think I'm not going to speak for the Water Development Commission, but I will say that ultimately, when the negotiations happened, the nation agreed to this amount of water in the state of Utah because I think the nation agreed that it was a good number for future development of the nation within the state. So, and again, I'm not speaking for them, but I think the parties all came to an
You already
agreement
spoke on
because,
that. So,
well,
That's
I'm
your-
sorry, that's my opinion.
you already,
Okay, sir, you have questions.
Yes, thank you so much for you all coming out and doing the presentation. However, I think the majority of the questions that are being asked should have been to Navajo Nation, and at this time is quiet or absent, where the majority of the questions should be answered by them. Now, and I think in order to get their attention is from each chapters within Utah to jump up and down and ask for a presentation from them on what each chapter can do as part of their projects. Now, the second one is that this particular process, in the adjudication process for this particular act, what is the foreseeable future of us tapping into actually doing a project on the settlement? Because, like within Arizona, how long has that been going on? For years and years, in the sense of what, 60s, 70s? So in this instance, are we gonna wait that long too?
Gosh, I hope not.
Then at the same time, when does the meter starts going from getting water out of the river? When we drop a pump in, taking water at that time, the meter starts running, or when we'll turn the faucet on and put it onto the water, is that when the meter starts going?
That's a good question. First of all, thank you for your comments. And I hate to say this, but your second question is probably also best directed to the Navajo Nation government. In terms of when does the meter start, just to be clear, this 81,500 is a yearly amount of water. This is not a one-time, you get this bucket. No. This is an ongoing yearly amount of water that is allocated to the nation. And so how does the metering work? Well, the metering starts, it's pretty complicated, and I'm not an engineer. I'm looking at my engineers, but we generally do start measuring when water leaves the system, i.e. it's pulled out in a ditch or a pipe, and how it's used, returned to the stream, whatever's left, and figuring out what the depletion is. Like Mark said, the depletion is the amount that's actually consumed. So a lot of water goes out onto a field. Not all of it is consumed. A lot of it actually flows back into the aquifer and back into the river. So there's some pretty complicated engineering and accounting that goes into answering that question. But the bottom line is, I don't know how to do that math.
Well, and all we can do is speak on the way Utah does it.
That's right.
I mean, we give you 7 years to basically drop a pump in and then turn it into something else. And then we can extend that working with your circumstances.
But
again,
we
that's
don't.
all Utah.
But we don't even have that restriction on the reserved right, because the reserved right is being administered by the Navajo Nation. Yeah, Mark.
Right. All the water right administration on Navajo will be by the Navajo Nation.
That's right.
So
Metering, accounting, depletion management, all of that happens by the nation, not by the state of Utah, not by Department of Interior.
That's right. As part of the agreement, the nation will report the usage, because that has to be included in Utah's total when we report it under our Colorado River.
So what Mark said is, once the nation has done all of its administration, it on an annual basis reports the depletion amount to the state of Utah, because the state of Utah has to report that amount to the River Commission under the Colorado River Compact to make sure that we're not exceeding our allocation. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
During the drought, like last year, when there was only a quarter of what's flowing through the river right now, who takes the first drink out of there?
The first drink is, I don't know what the first water right is. Mike?
It would be Navajo.
It would be the Navajo.
So you guys have the earliest priority.
Because you have the earliest priority date.
Utah Navajo.
The Utah Navajo, that's right. Thank you for clarifying.
Navajo Utah.
Navajo, Utah. Thank you, thank you.
He asked my question,
Okay.
my son. And yeah, a lot of my peers would ask, when?
When? When are you gonna see this water?
Yeah, because time is passing. for
Right.
A lot of us.
Yes.
And I can say, this is what they said. This is, well, I followed this Utah Navajo water right issue almost from its initiation. I've been following the updates on it. So,
Well, let me tell you from the state's perspective. We are doing our very best to finish the process that we have, and that's this adjudication process. Getting that final court decree is a #1 goal of the state engineer. She has been pushing us faster than we even think we can go to get this done. And we know that the reason that needs to happen is so that that money can get turned over to the nation to put it to use. So the next question is when? That's a question for your government. So once you see that money, once we get this decree in place, when? That's a question for your government. Thank you. Well, I think it looks like we're wrapping up. Oh, sorry, sir.
On this.
Yeah.
How is Navajo responsive to the adjudication process? Timely, promptly?
Yes. So mostly we're working with the federal team in their trust capacity because they are the ones who have to file the claim for the water rights. But we are holding monthly meetings where all of us get together and talk through the process. Where are we? What does the nation need to do? What does the federal government need to do? Where is the state? And we're working through the process of the adjudication to get it done as quickly as possible. Like I said, so again, that question of when is sooner rather than later.
So we had a November 21st or 22nd deadline to submit our claims, and we submitted them before the federal government submitted them to the state, to the court, we submitted them to the Navajo Nation, and they reviewed them and were timely to get us they gave us their responses back in a timely manner and worked with us so we can meet the court deadline on this. So it's happened. The claims have been filed in a timely manner, and they have been reviewed by the Navajo Nation.
And, yep.
The money the funds that are part of this act, when are they accessible?
So it is my understanding that they are accessible after the water right adjudication because there were certain conditions precedents. We want to have certainty of the settlement before the settlement is finalized. So we assign the water rights agreement, and when we have the water rights adjudicated now and recognized, we will have all the conditions in place, and we have the money. Those were the three things we needed. We needed a signed agreement, we needed the water rights firmed up, and we needed the money. And when we have those three things, then we can say it is done, and that's called enforceability. Then the agreement becomes enforceable, and when it's enforceable, it's your money at that point.
Right, and so what we're waiting on is that final proposed determination to go through the court process and get a final decree from the court. When we have that decree, that's when the whole agreement becomes enforceable. And I should mention the money that Justin is talking about from the federal government, it is in account. It's been allocated, it's been appropriated, it's there. So we just have to get our adjudication done. And it does take a little time, that's why it's not tomorrow, it's not this month, but we are working through the process as quickly as possible, and we're hoping to get that proposed determinations filed next year.
I don't know if you're going to want to hear this, but it typically takes 10 to plus years to implement these settlements. Talking to other teams, they have a 10-year legislation, and they typically have to ask for extensions for more time. I will say that we're pushing to be much ahead of that 10-year mark. Okay, this legislation was passed in 2020.
December, right?
December of 2020. So this December will be the 3-year mark. And we have made a lot of progress towards getting this settlement implemented. We have the water right adjudication. We have the agreement signed and we have the money. So we are possibly going to be within 5 years on this, which I know seems frustrating, but compared to other settlements, it is extremely fast. And we are working hard to make this the fastest approved settlement out there, but we're still working.
Right, and it is also one of the fastest adjudications out there. Adjudications are slow. It's just the state process is slow. And we are working as hard as possible to get this done as quickly as possible. Yes, ma'am. You're good? Okay. Yes, sir.
What Norman was talking about legislation about combining lawsuits, I think he was talking about state of Arizona versus New Mexico.
Versus
state of, Department of Interior versus Navajo Nation about Colorado River rights. They're basically the same, so they're just putting it together.
Well, as an attorney for the state of Utah, I'm thrilled to say that we have no involvement in that lawsuit. So your water rights here in the state of Utah, the Navajo Utah water rights, are not affected by that litigation.
Yes. Let's to get a project on the list, and to get that, we need some sort of feasibility study. Is that feasibility study monies available off list?
I will ask the question of my solicitor when I get back. My understanding is that the money is held until the agreement can be enforced. And then when it's enforced, we know it's final and won't be changed because all the pieces are in play. I'll ask your specific question. My understanding is now that no, the money has to stay in the trust fund until everything's in place, which I hope is in a year or as close to it as possible, but that's me being hopeful and fingers crossed. I'll ask the question. I'm happy to also look for other sources of funding. This settlement is not the only source of federal funding to do feasibility work. And so I would reach out to all the agencies who provide money to the reservations, provide money for Native Trust responsibilities, and look for what opportunities there are. It's also seed money. The Navajo Nation can spend its own money to do feasibility work, so that when the 250 is released, it can hit the ground right into a project. You know, the feasibility money is typically a lot less than the building the project money.
So I'll just say we have about 3 minutes left, so we need to wrap up.
The one you're working under, DOI. National Park Service also is under, I believe, same umbrella. National Park Service put a buffer zone to the Lake Powell water and the rivers, which is blocking us as Navajos to the use of the waters. Can you relay that to Holland and hopefully to bring her whip out and say, open that, do away with the buffer zone?
That's a good point, right?
Yes. So
I will work within my sphere of influence.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's your 3 minutes.
That's my 3 minutes. I really appreciate everyone coming out today. Appreciate all the questions. And I really enjoyed visiting. This is my second visit down here, so thank you very much.